You maybe have heard the Latin famous dictum I don't know who first created it, must be some Roman philosopher. Per aspera ad astra, which translates as through adversity to the stars. Adversity could also be translated as difficulty. Through adversity, through difficulty, through suffering, you could say, through adversity to the stars, which means, of course, as obviously the wisdom embedded in this is that you only grow through adversity, through difficulties, just like the body. And you don't have to seek it out, as I said before. Some people do, and there is a tradition in many spiritual traditions, in Christianity and many other religions, probably all. There is a very ancient tradition by which the practitioner seeks out suffering rather than tries to avoid suffering. That's the ascetic tradition in religions. It existed very strongly in early Christianity and in medieval Christianity, and still exists in other religions, still exists strongly in India. And that is, sometimes it involves being homeless, having no possession, being totally at the mercy of what you are given by other people, or it could involve doing something strange, like sitting on top of a pillar or a pole for years on end. The weirdest things. So I can see why they do it, although Western people, when they look at it, or they look back into their own past, the Middle Ages, they say, how could people be so crazy to do something like that? They starve themselves, they get close to death, they inflict suffering on their body, they shut themselves in a cell, as Christian medieval monks often did. They go to a cave. There were the desert fathers in very early Christianity in North Africa who lived out in the desert and would live on locusts and they became, some of them became spiritual teachers. People would come to them. To some extent, that still exists in India, outside of the big cities, which are becoming, of course, modernized. But that tradition is still very much alive in India. I can see why they do this. It's also in Zen. You go to a Zen monastery, it's pretty austere and harsh. The conditions are harsh and austere. The meditation practice is done by facing a wall in many places. You sit in front of a wall and you meditate. And in the winter, they might even open the windows. You get really cold. And so it's a dreadful situation to be in. I mean, you wouldn't normally choose that for yourself, but they choose it. The idea behind it was probably first, when humans first came up with this idea that imposing suffering on yourself can bring about a change in consciousness. That is the idea behind it, that it becomes the spiritual practice. It probably arose in certain humans who had gone through suffering. Not they didn't choose it, but life gave it to them. And then they realized that at some point they experienced the spiritual awakening. And then they looked back and said, how did that happen? I suffered and suffered, and life became so hard for me, and then something inside me suddenly switched, and there was another dimension was suddenly there. Okay, so they began to understand the relationship between the suffering that was spontaneous, natural suffering arising in their life situation, and what happened to them. And then they attracted naturally people who could sense that they had something that other humans didn't have, so they attracted those. And then they came up with the idea of recreating what happened to them naturally in a more formal, artificial environment, so to speak. In other words, they created a spiritual center where they made people suffer. And so that became the spiritual tradition in many Christian and Hindu and the Sufis also in Islam. They wander from place to place wearing the simplest of clothes and have no home. I can see why, but it's not the path I would suggest that is right for most of you, unless you absolutely feel that it's right for you. Then it's fine, then you probably wouldn't be here, you would be in meditation boot camp, or you would be in a Zen monastery. It would be your 10th year of suffering in a Zen monastery and still asking the master, I didn't quite get it. Can you explain again what this is all about? As one philosopher said, I think his name was Alan, his first name was Woody, is Woody. He said, life is full of heartache, misery and suffering, and it's over all too soon. So the important thing in all this is, whenever you encounter difficulties, use them as part of, incorporate them into your spiritual practice instead of resisting them. Just making sure that the difficulty is a true difficulty that you encounter, rather than a difficulty that is produced exclusively, almost exclusively in your mind. Many problems only exist in your mind. You need to be able to tell the difference between something that is truly a challenge and something that is only something that's happening in your unconscious mind. By unconscious means, I mean thought movement and no awareness. Like the guy, our friend from Seinfeld that we saw last night, George. He gives the most wonderful examples throughout the episodes of Seinfeld of somebody who is totally in his ego. So he's experiencing problems that don't exist. What does it matter what bathroom stalls, what kind of doors there are on bathroom stalls? It doesn't matter whatsoever, but it becomes a problem for him. His ego is in it, and it could even lead to the end of his relationship with his girlfriend. Totally insane, but it's actually very normal. That's why I showed it last night. You create a mental position, and then you identify with it. And then it regains it's not even that you create it. It creates itself. And then you are possessed by a thought. And then you are the thought. And then you're fighting some other thought in somebody else. And by fighting, it gets stronger.
First of all, I want to thank you and Eckhart for everything that you've given me and are giving me now. It's so greatly appreciated. I'm not sure if it's a question, but I need a response from you to clarify. It deals with a pain body and challenges, overcoming challenges, transcending challenges. And then I think I heard you say this morning, I heard Eckhart say yesterday, the good news is we don't have to suffer. So, 5 years ago, coming up to 5 years, my son died. And I went through, he died suddenly. So it was, and he also was my best friend. So it was I can't even think about the suffering that I went through at that time. You know, it's just like, it was, I wailed, I cried, and for months, I just went there, in that suffering, that pain, and that broken heart that was torn apart. And I remember, to the point I was crawling on the ground I have a place down by the sea, and I was there, and he loved that place, and we spent many wonderful times there together. And I was crawling on the ground and crying, and I heard him say to me, "Dad, stop that." And that came to me, a shift happened. There was a change there. Of course, I've transcended it, and I've overcome it, not completely. I never will overcome that completely, I don't think. But what I want clarification from you on is, I don't really believe, I don't fully understand that one can transcend, overcome, or have a choice in certain situations concerning that type of suffering. So there's where I'm wondering, when you say we don't have to suffer, we do have a choice. I'm saying it's not been my experience in that case.
You know, as I said earlier, and what Eckhart says is suffering is our greatest teacher. So the suffering is teaching you. And you already know that in order to go beyond that suffering, that's the evolution of human consciousness through you. So consciousness is awakening through you. So not to say that, I almost see you and sense that in order to hold on to the memory of your son, that the fear of letting go of the suffering will somehow get you be less connected to your son. Yeah. And that's not the case, and that's what your son was saying to you. You don't have to. You don't have to suffer. Because you will be actually more connected to your son without the suffering being there.
Yeah, in a way, he tells me that.
Yeah. Yeah, he's telling you that.
Yeah.
And he's saying to you, Dad, you don't have to suffer. I'm right here.
Well, could you say that again, please?
You're what?
Just tell me that I'm going to be more connected with my son by not suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the suffering is just getting in the way for that real connection not of the form. The form is gone. Every form will pass away, but what is left behind is the essence. And that true essence lives in you. Your son and you are no different. It's the same essence. So you're going to be more connected to yourself, which is also your son. And that's the gift through his death that he's leaving you. Is that space, that empty space, that void that he's leaving behind for you to go deeper into
Well, you know,
yourself.
it explains, when I go to his grave these days, I don't feel that suffering, I feel peace. So that's a wonderful gift. I know he gives me those gifts, and he's more present in a very positive way, in almost a jovial way. You know, because I'm trying to communicate with him. Sometimes he just laughs at my way of making efforts to communicate with him, more or less saying, I'm right beside you, kind of thing, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
It's right here. It's all right here.
Thank you very much.
I have to share this story, this last story, because when Maya, our dog, passed away last September, and a few months before that, my father passed away. And actually, Maya was kind of in that very critical mode, even when my father was passing, and it was like, who's going to go first? That sort of thing. And it was obvious my father was going first, and I said to my father, you know, Maya's going to come right after you soon after. Will you greet her? And when Maya, she died at home in my arms, and when she was passing away in my arms, I felt my father's presence come. And then I felt them both there, joyful. It was just like they were so happy. And it was just like, wow, this is incredible. And it brought such peace and such joy. There was just absolutely no fear, nothing. I just felt this incredible sense of joy. And I knew that joy was emanating from the essence of who they were. And it was just absolutely so beautiful, you know, and they're still there. I could still feel them. When they passed, and when because my father passed first, I was able to touch into that empty voice, that void of just, I remember being in, you know, getting ready to change and in my closet and just like, wow, I miss him, and that emptiness. And then I went into that emptiness, and suddenly there was this tremendous peace there. And it was just like, wow, that emptiness is God itself. And we are God itself through the form. And eventually all forms, as they always do, leave. And it leaves you with emptiness, which is really your God nature, which is God. You're left with God. And he's saying, you're left with God. Don't hold on to the suffering anymore, because the suffering and the attachment to the form is keeping you stuck. It's keeping you further away from God. And God is all around us, right here, right now, through every living being, nature, and yet beyond all of that, beyond the form. It's just here, and the forms pop up. But yet, stillness is here. God is here. That little space that Eckhart talked about all of a sudden became big. That's how it works. You take that little space and you go right into that space, and soon enough that space just... There is more space in this universe than there are stars in the sky. how beautiful it is that we get to witness the stars and have the experience of our children, of our parents, even though they can bring us to unconsciousness sometimes. But saying all that, when they're on their deathbed, do you think about that? Well, sometimes you do if you're in the grip still of the pain body, but as we begin to awaken, we tap into something else that we begin to see right through their own pain. Because that pain that they feel is no different than our own. And we know if we can transcend the pain within ourselves, so too, when we look then at the other in their pain, we don't see them only as pain, only as their pain body, in other words. We see the essence of who they are. And the pain body is just a temporary thing. We'll get these gifts, and as we become older and older, the things and the people around us pass on, and we're left with this emptiness. And in that emptiness, you can say is also fullness, because you are one with God. You've merged with the essence of who you are, and you don't feel that emptiness. You become filled with peace, with love, with joy. Thank you.
Okay, I have so much to deal with here. I need to do that first, and then I can, when my plate is empty, because you have so much on your plate now, as the expression goes, and of course, the plate is never empty. Before they came up with all the digital devices, there was only the human, the busy mind. So, creating one thought after another, keeping you trapped in content, the content of the mind, so that your entire life was content-based, no spaciousness. Of course, there was already television, has been around for a long time. And when I talked to Ariana Huffington last week, she said what she used to do for many years, the moment she opened the door to her apartment, she would turn on the TV news. So come in the door, news. So that's one way of filling up your mind continuously, avoiding any moment of stillness, presence. And now, of course, the television has been around for a while, radio, and then came all the devices that we have now that can amplify the tendency of the human mind to live exclusively in the realm of content. So that you get continuous input of stuff, another word for content, so that you get the input from your emails and text messages, each one very, very important, and I'm sure much more important than this talk, according to the mind, more pressing than a talk about waking up. Or the mind says, I can do both things. I have developed the ability to text and email, and at the same time I know exactly what you're talking about. I could repeat, if you ask me afterwards, although I have been texting, I could repeat to you what you've been talking about. And this may be true. Maybe you could repeat what I was talking about, and on that level you took it in, but you would have missed a much more important level, which is not the words, but an energy field that comes with the words. It is behind the words and in between the words. That's really it. And so unfortunately, you would miss that. So you would take only in the teaching on the level of stuff, because the words are also stuff, but it's a particular kind of stuff that points beyond stuff, not self-serving stuff. But if you only take it in as stuff, then it's just more stuff. Interesting, perhaps, or not that interesting. I've heard that before. So I might as well send another email. And you wrote that in your book, didn't you? The now is so very important. I read that years ago. What else can you tell us? So I have plenty of time for more text messages because I've heard all that before. Okay. So that's one level of being here or not being here. So you would miss the more important dimension, because the words are secondary, and all the words really point to is a particular inner state. So while you listen, if it works for you, that inner state of spaciousness arises. But there you have to be really there with your attention, because it is the state of that spaciousness is the attention. It is the alert presence. So as you sit here, the alert presence needs to be there. This cannot be there if you are texting. Then you're only taking in the words, the information. So the most essential thing here is the alert presence. So all the words point to the alert presence. Sometimes the words point to obstacles that may arise to prevent you from being in the alert presence, so that when they arise you recognize them. That's fine. But the very essence of being here is a deepening of that state of consciousness, and the mind, the egoic mind, can very easily convince you that it has more important things to think about than presence. I've got so much on my plate. Interesting expression. I've got so much on my plate. I can't deal with this now. Present. Maybe when I've sorted out all the stuff that's going on, when my plate is empty, then I can deal with it. It's a very common mind pattern. Jesus already talked about it. He had these stories of a man who was invited to a wedding feast, and he comes up with excuses why he can't go to the wedding feast. And always what he says, or different people are invited and different people are asked, and each person has a different excuse. And the excuse always starts with the words, it's in the Gospels, the excuse always starts with the words, let me first, I have to sell my cows and my oxen, let me first sell my cows, let me first, even one sentence, let me first bury my father. But there's always, let me first do this before I can accept your invitation. The mind always said, well, okay, yeah, but let me first. And that is the mind pattern which says, okay, I have so much to deal with here, I need to do that first, and then I can, when my plate is empty, because you have so much on your plate now, as the expression goes, and of course, the plate is never empty. As you might have found, life gives you one thing after another. In that sense, the plate is never empty, but the emptiness can only be accessed within, in the present moment. As long as you get hypnotized by the excuses of the mind, then you can never access that dimension. So, quite amazing how the gadgets can amplify the tendency of the human mind to be continuously trapped in stuff. So before it was just, before radio and television, you just had your mind and you could talk to other people. And then came the beginning of devices. And now the digital devices, of course, you get bombarded, most of humans, especially younger generation, some of the older generation too, get continuously bombarded with things that require your immediate attention. It comes through your phone, your smartphone, in the form of, well, phone calls, but even more frequently, probably, text messages, bing, bing, bong, bing. And they come in all the time and immediately go, oh. And then it requires a reply. And then emails, they can come in through all kinds of devices too. And then the latest postings on Facebook, your friends, very important, what they're doing right now. You need to know that. And they need to know what you are doing right now. It's so important. Oh, and Twitter. Tweets coming in all the time from all kinds of people. And you feel connected to these people. The youngsters get famous pop stars, you get their tweets. Continuously things coming in. Oh, Justin Bieber is tweeting me, says the little girl, oh, wow. And that becomes continuously filled with, there's never a moment of spaciousness because these devices amplify the tendency of the human mind to be reborn, the tendency of consciousness, one could say, to continuously be reborn into some new mental formation. And then people sleep at night, I hear, many sleep even with their phone on the pillow next to them or right next to the bed. And I read that when people wake up in the night or the last thing before they go to sleep, they're still sending emails and receiving emails. But there is some hope on the horizon. I was told, when I was at the conference last week, in Wisdom Conference, where there are many people attending who work for these companies that engaged in digital producing or digital devices. I don't know how it all functions, but we were told that some companies now, for example, even in Germany, VW motor cars, Volkswagen, they give you company phones which are programmed to turn off at 6 p.m. and to turn on again at 8 a.m. That's wonderful. That's progress. That means there's some awareness here that the continuous engagement with these devices can be very harmful, and even companies are discovering that these things can be very harmful. So our alertness really needs to be there, and some discipline, so that we do not become the slaves of our gadgets. There are wonderful possibilities that are opening up through these. They're neither good nor bad in themselves. There are wonderful possibilities of connecting with people on a certain level. It's not necessarily the real connection, but on a certain level, and consciousness. News are no longer the exclusive. No longer can just big corporations disseminate news, which used to be the case. Anybody can now disseminate news, which is good and bad. It can be a wonderful thing. You can reach, if you have something important to say, you can put it on the net. It could go, as the expression goes, viral. And a few days later, millions of people, you've reached millions of people. It can happen. Now, in many cases, those things may not be very helpful that go viral. Often things that are particularly unhelpful for awakening go viral, but it could be something helpful. So we need to be very careful when we use these, have some discipline also, especially at night, so that we don't get this continuous input of stuff.
My question is on karma. I grew up in a Hindu family, and often karma is talked about as something that provides a balance in the world, but it can sometimes seem rigid, and it's a powerful influence over someone's life. And when I listen to you speak, I feel so much peace and so much hope. And you talk about presence and being as the keys to enjoying form and creating positive circumstances in your life or softening circumstances. And I wanted to know how karma fits into all of that, because there seems to be places in the world where there's not a lot of resources, where there's a lot of brutality. For example, I met somebody at work, and she was a refugee from Afghanistan, and she was a young girl. And the interpreter had told me that her brother and her father were killed in front of her, and she had another brother taken. And then I later learned that a lot of times the Taliban doesn't take the young boys to fight. They take them and they use them as sex slaves. And when I hear about stories like this, I just wonder how I can stay aligned with love or trusting the universe when I'm not able to see through your eyes yet. And how do you hold both?
Thank you. Thank you. Now, of course, everybody is born into a certain external environment, and also is born with certain predispositions. They may be partly genetic, they may be other things, that a person is born with certain patterns, in other words. We don't need to examine where they come from, but just to see the fact that the human being is first of all born into a certain environment, which may be violent, or it may be relatively peaceful, and the person is born with inner patterns. You inherit certain, even pain body is partly inherited. Some babies cry a lot, They have a relatively heavy pain body already in this world. Doesn't mean they're spiritually less advanced. The opposite may be the case. There's no knowing. Other babies are relatively peaceful. And so there's a whole set of conditioning then happens. You come into the environment with certain predispositions, then the environment conditions you further, and in all that there's no choice involved. There's just influences. And so you find yourself in this world with certain unconscious patterns that have become the conditioning of who the person is, the unconscious conditioning. So karma, as I see it, is the unconscious conditioning that runs your life. And that still applies to many humans. And karma is partly collective, you've been born into it, and partly personal, they come together. So really you can only understand karma not as an abstract subject external to yourself, because then you get into belief systems and philosophy. We're not going that way. You can only understand karma by observing yourself and by observing, and then you'll know many other things. But you need to, really, if you want to understand karma, you need to look at yourself. And so I began to understand what karma is when there was something arose that was not part of karma at all. And really here we come to the key. The arising of consciousness or presence or a spiritual awakening is not part of karma. It is another dimension that breaks into the karmic realm. So you do not become awakened by accumulating, as they sometimes say in the East, good karma. That's fine on this level. You can make the walls or the furniture in your prison a little bit more comfortable. But there is something totally from beyond karma that can come into your life at any point within the wheel of karma and rebirth. Rebirth is, of course, part of karma. The deeper meaning of rebirth is identification with form. We don't need to even believe in transmigration or whatever. You can look at rebirth in your own life. Every time you identify with a thought that arises, which is form, you are born into that thought. Because you identify, your sense of self is in it. That's karma. You're reborn. Karma then is unconscious identification with these patterns that you have inherited, the conditioned. Complete identification of consciousness with the conditioned patterns. So consciousness is dreaming, one could say. This is why we use the word awakening in many spiritual traditions. Consciousness is awakening. Consciousness is in a dreamlike state when you're identified with the unconscious patterns. And then you are condemned to rebirth. In fact, many times every day, you are reborn into a reaction, an emotional, mental reaction. No presence at all, just rebirth into some form. Or you're reborn into thoughts that arise and you completely believe in every thought. And then you act from those thoughts and emotions. And the action creates further reactions, and the actions confirm to you that you were right. If you have certain mind patterns about, for example, that other people are basically dishonest, just one example of people. People are so dishonest, they're all trying to get something from me. That tends to confirm itself in your life experience. You can try it out, or you may have experienced it before you became more conscious. That habitual thought patterns that you're identified with, and that is karma, creates in the external confirmation that it is correct. So if you think the world is full of evil people, you will meet many evil people. And in other words, unconscious people. And even people who are on the break or who are halfway between conscious and unconscious, when you come together with them, your belief will pull them into unconsciousness. And that's karma. So karma is the complete absence of conscious presence, and so it's automatic. It plays itself out. And time does not free you of karma. That is a misperception, that if you only have enough time, eventually you can become free of karma. Karma renews itself and repeats itself. It's a wheel. And so the only thing that can free you of karma is the arising of presence. And how is it that for some person presence arises? I cannot tell you why. I only know that at any point in the wheel of karma, presence can come in. It can happen to It can happen to a criminal in prison, condemned to death. It can happen to somebody who has never heard of anything spiritual. It can happen to somebody who has been meditating for 30 years, or not happen to the same person who has been meditating for 30 years. So, in your own life, I can see from what you're saying that presence has already, I can sense that, presence has already come into your life. And presence frees you from karma, not all at once. Karma has an enormous momentum, meaning the patterns in yourself, the thought patterns, the emotional patterns, the reactive patterns. There's enormous momentum behind that. But as presence arises, gradually karma diminishes the energy behind it diminishes. And gradually you experience a fading out of those patterns. They become weaker. You're no longer completely in the grip of those patterns. So as presence arises, there's a gradual fading out of karma. Not that it matters that much anymore, because once you are present, you can, as the previous questioner said, when we were talking about certain thoughts still arising, certain negative thoughts, that's still part of the karma, the old patterns, the unconscious habit patterns inherited. They still arise, but it's no longer problematic, and they no longer cause the suffering that they would have caused before, because they are seen in the light of awareness. So the light of awareness arises, and in the light of awareness, the patterns no longer dominate your life. They no longer run your life. And if occasionally it happens that the patterns do take over, then after a little while your presence returns and you say, well, there it was again. Pain body is part of karma, which may be strong in some people, not so strong in others. And so as presence arises, you are freed from karma. And then you have another completely different factor coming into your life. And so, for example, for a person to become free of collective karma, you need a considerable amount of presence for that to come in, to remove, and it then will remove you in one way or another. Either internally, you find yourself completely free. You might still live in a violent society, but internally you would be free. There is a possibility you can have a holy man or woman living surrounded by violence. It's possible. It's rare, but possible. Or very often it happens that life removes you out of there and you find yourself somewhere else. So let's say vast collective karma, for example, in the case of, let's say, you have the Taliban there, you have all kinds of unconscious movements, you had Soviet communism, you had National Socialism in Germany, and for a person being born into that and not being drawn into that unconsciousness requires considerable presence. So not that many people, for example, in Germany, when Hitler came to power, not many people were able to remove themselves. Somewhere, some artists, some writers, they left. They could see what was happening, and they were strong enough not to be identified with the collective. When there had been a tradition of obedience to authority for hundreds of years, a tradition of following your leader, and so on, to take yourself out of that, collective karma requires considerable presence, but some people had it. So it is our destiny then to go beyond karma by being the receptacles for presence. All you can do to be helpful in this world and help others is those people that you come into contact with. Everybody in this who is awakening will find that sooner or later they become a kind of teacher to others. And what a spiritual teacher does, the teacher points out the possibility of awakening out of identification with unconscious patterns, which means the spiritual teacher teaches you to go beyond karma. But when I get really afraid of losing all my money in the stock market, of getting sick or losing a loved one, how do I handle that? Fear again. The question is about fear. How do I handle the fear of catching a disease, of losing many things? Many people are experiencing not only the fear now of the virus, they're also experiencing the fear of the repercussions of what's happening. Businesses are closing down, or everything is closing down. It's a very strange thing that this is happening. It's like an enforced closing down of the busyness, not just the business, but the busyness of the world, an enforced sudden ending of all that. Many planes are not flying anymore. And some cities are empty of people, or suddenly, as if because until this happened, the world was absurdly busy. One thing after noisy, busy, everything was in movement. Everything was lost in the world, lost in the minds. And suddenly, as if somebody said, look, let's turn it off for a while. Oh, enforced stillness almost. Exactly what millions of humans actually need to experience. It doesn't mean that they will automatically also experience the inner stillness, but there is a possibility of an awakening for many if they can go beyond the fear, the fearful thoughts. But how do you go beyond the fearful thoughts? Well, it requires a little bit of awareness. But if you are here with us, you probably have that awareness. What I mean by that is the awareness of what's going on in your mind. To recognize, rather than total identification with what's going on in your mind, you have in the background an awareness of what's going on in your mind. Very different, because it's a different dimension of consciousness, the awareness. It's not the same as a thought. The awareness can recognize what thoughts go on in your mind, and you realize, I'm thinking all these useless thoughts, but that realization, I'm verbalizing it now, but because we are communicating through language, but that realization that all these useless and destructive thoughts are going through my head, that is a realization that is not verbal. It's pre or post-verbal, because it comes through the awareness. And there's a simple recognition that what's going on in your mind is not helpful. It's making you fearful and unhappy. So it is to be tackled there. All these, the problem that he mentions, or he or she mentions 3, fear of losing all my money or my savings, my investments, what I've been saving, of getting sick, or something bad could happen to a loved one. So you have fear for yourself, you have fear for others, and of course, all these things are not happening now, the things that you fear, but they could happen, says the mind. So I better think about it now, because in case it does, of course, if they did happen, you would face the situation. With the power of your conscious awareness, you would face the sickness, you would face the loss of money, and you would even face the loss of a loved one or the suffering of a loved one. With the power of your presence, you can face that. But what you cannot do, you cannot overcome these problems or face them because they only exist in your imagination. They haven't even happened yet. Therefore, there's absolutely nothing you can do about them. In fact, they will simply amplify. The more you think about them, the more they become amplified. It's a totally illusory realm that is making you suffer. And so if there's a minimum of awareness, you can suddenly become aware of what it is that you are doing to yourself. Well, it's not that you're voluntarily doing it to yourself, but one could say it is happening to you. So you become aware of what is happening to you, because the thoughts in your mind, virtually all the thoughts in the absence of awareness, happen to you. They are not voluntary. So people say, I think this, I think. You don't think, the thinking happens to you. When you're not aware, you're at the mercy of thought. You are at the mercy of the energy field that what we call thought. It lives in you. You are possessed. You don't know it. The moment you realize it, that this is not the fearful thinking, isn't something that you do, because if it's something that you do, you say, yeah, I'm doing it, but I can't stop it. No, you are not doing it. It happens to you. So some people say, well, perceive it as, well, why am I doing this to myself? Well, that's already, it's a good first step. Why am I making myself suffer by thinking all that? And then the next step is you realize, well, it's not really me doing it. It's the self-serving thought forms that are swirling around in my mind continuously, that are making me unhappy, that have no useful purpose. I'm not helping myself or anybody by thinking these things, by projecting bad things that could happen. And so with the awareness of what's going on in your mind comes the first time a moment of freedom. Because before you had no free will. Without awareness, you have no free will. You're at the mercy of a conditioned mind. So what do? So you have recognized that what's been happening to you fulfills no useful purpose. That's an important realization, because before there is an assumption in the unconscious mind that unless you worry a lot, then you're not controlling your life. There is the delusion that the more you think about useless, you don't know it's useless. The more you think about the problems of your life, then you need to continue thinking in order to hold it all together. You need to really worry, or the problem of the world. Oh, If you don't worry, then your life will fall to pieces. It's the underlying assumption. Of course, it's a delusion. So the worrying, the fearful thinking does not want to end. You need to know that it has a momentum. And you cannot fight it. If you fight it, you make it stronger. You give it added energy. So it's not by willpower that you can stop it. Or as I just said, you can stop it briefly, but not for long, through exercising willpower. So you stop it simply by first recognizing not only the futility, but also the destructive nature of that type of thinking. And then you begin to see that a lot of the unhappiness is produced by the narratives in your mind. And at that moment, you have a choice. You can continue being dragged along in the stream of fearful thinking. Or you can say, my choice is now to take my attention away from fearful thinking. I'm verbalizing it. But where does it go? If the fearful thinking wants all your consciousness continuously. It says, no, I'm letting go, I want it. And then you say, no, I don't want to go that way anymore. It's very simple. You bring your attention somewhere else. You need something at first. My recommendation is feel your inner body. Direct your attention. Let's say you wake up in the night or in the morning. Direct your attention, instead of thinking, direct your attention into the inner energy field of your hands. And then you hold it there. Doesn't require willpower, it's just a simple decision. And you hold it. You feel the inner aliveness in your hands. Becomes an anchor for stepping out of mind, being present. Can you feel the energy in your hands? I can. And it's always wonderful. I've been feeling the energy in my hands for many years. It's always fresh and new. And I don't tire speaking of it, because it's always fresh and new. And of course, it's not just the hands. If you can't feel the energy in your hands, close your eyes and ask yourself let's say your right hand, or if you're left-handed, your left hand. Ask yourself if your left or right hand is still there or not. Is it still there? How do I know it's there? How can I know it's there right now? No, you can't know it because you remember it was there when you saw it a few seconds ago. That's not knowing that it's there, because it might have disappeared. You close your eyes, you're not moving your hand. How can you know it's there? You can know it's there, but how does that happen? What is it? How do you know it? You can feel it, but what is it that you feel? You feel the energy within the hand. It's very subtle at first, so you need to be alert to feel it. But that alertness that then goes in the body is taken away from thinking, and you suddenly your hand feels more alive than it was before, and that's only the beginning. You can feel both hands simultaneously. And then you realize you can also feel other parts of the body, your feet at the same time, and legs. And then you become aware of a all-pervasive sense of aliveness in the entire body, energy field. Yep. And the amazing thing is, by the way, you may also become aware that you're breathing, because that's connected with the body. You're breathing into the body. And the breath flows in and it flows out. And the more you become aware of your body, the more you become aware of your breathing. The more you become aware of your breathing, the more you become aware of the body. There's a wonderful aliveness there. And what happened to your mind activity? It subsided almost completely or completely, because you cannot be aware of inner body and at the same time think. A few fragments may be there of thoughts, but not a sustained stream of thinking. It's not possible, because all your attention, your consciousness has gone away from the conceptualizing mind into the inner body. I'm sometimes asked, and I think I even wrote it somewhere, what is the most effective spiritual practice in daily life? Or if I only had one spiritual practice, what would it be? What would be the most highly recommended spiritual practice? And I would say, observe your breath. That would, if you spend a lot of time that in your spare moments and so on, that would bring about an enormous influx of presence into your life. And so that's quite simple. Another thing that happens as you follow the breath with your attention, your attention moves out of the mind into the body, and as the breath enters the body, you also become aware almost inevitably of the inner energy field of the body. I hope that, well, I don't hope anything, but it would be great if, as I talk about this, you could feel what it is that I'm talking about. So if I'm talking about, verify in this moment what it is that I'm talking about. When I talk about follow your breath, then follow your breath. You can still listen and be aware of your breathing at the same time. It's quite pleasant. And then you can sense as the breath moves in, there's also a sense of aliveness in your body, hard to describe. You feel that the body is alive. It may start with the area here because that's where the breath moves. And if you follow the breath with your attention may move a little deeper than the actual breath. It may move into the abdomen. So you become aware of an energy field down here. And so the abdomen falls and rises. As you breathe in, it rises. And then it shrinks. And you feel, at first, a very subtle feeling of energy that pervades the inner, we call it the inner body awareness. And there's an energy field that then it's not just here, it pervades your arms and legs. It's everywhere. You can feel that the body is actually alive. You feel the life of the body from the inside. So what is that? It is the animating presence in the body. It is the organizing principle that in a miraculous way keeps the body alive every moment, coordinating countless highly complicated functions of the body, with all the organs, with the chemical laboratories, the unbelievable complexity. There's an intelligence behind it that temporarily organizes the molecules and atoms in that way. You are not doing it, it's happening. So you connect with that intelligence, it becomes conscious, and you feel then you're not only aware of your breathing, you're also aware of the entire inner body. And it's not really the body, it's something that's beyond the body. It's a portal into something deeper. But let's call it inner body. It's invisible. And so breath awareness if it can lead you into and become combined with inner body awareness. And that's a beautiful, very powerful meditation that can take you out of any turmoil situation. Even if you several times you lose yourself in the mind again, you bring it back to the breath and body. And as you sit here and listen to me, you may be able to be aware not only of auditory perception, which is the words you're hearing, but at the same time you're aware of the inner body. So what is that? It is the presence that pervades the entire body. Presence isn't just a head phenomenon. Presence is experienced with the entire body, and then after a while, as it becomes more deeper and more intense, presence, you begin to feel also that you are surrounded by a presence. And that's a strange thing. And that the space that is around you, we mentioned space briefly yesterday, the space that is around you is something very, very mysterious. Very mysterious. And you can sense that this is a mystical thing I'm saying. No, you don't need to believe it. You can sense that space that's all around you is there. There's something to it that you cannot define. It's not just nothing. Well, it is nothing in the sense that it is no thing. It is not a thing, it is not an object, but it's not just nothing. There is a presence all around you. And so don't want to talk about it too much. It becomes too mystical for many people. But I'm suggesting this as to experience, first of all, the aliveness of the inner, the presence that pervades the inner body. That is the inner body. And then you can sense that the world around you also is becoming more alive, and especially the space around you. There is an alive presence in which you live that surrounds you. And that presence is both within and without. And when you sit in your room or here now, you sense this invisible presence all around you. What was it? Ralph Waldo Emerson, the American, I would say, spiritual teacher, 19th century, he said, "We live in the lap of immense intelligence." Great teacher, by the way, if you want to, I highly recommend Emerson. We live in the lap of immense intelligence. We are surrounded by this vast intelligence. And if you know that, there's a difference between just not knowing it and living completely unconsciously as a little, or misperceiving yourself as an entity, a separate entity. Here's me and there's the rest of the universe. No, you don't end here. You are extended into the vastness of the universe in this dimension of space. So, because there's outer space and there's inner space. And first we become aware of that inner space when thinking subsides. You become aware of that spaciousness within. Consciousness without the content of consciousness, just the space. You could describe it, it's like a room, and you remove all the objects in the room, and all that remains is the space. That is the equivalent of when you come to a cessation of thinking, but you're not falling asleep at all. To stop thinking here means to rise above thinking. We are not talking about falling below thinking. falling below thinking, you do that every night when you go to sleep. Or when you're suffering from serious jet lag, you begin to fall below thinking. Or when you drink alcohol, the tendency is for you to take you below thinking, or most other substances. I haven't tried I've tried very few substances. You cannot pronounce judgment on all substances. But some substances take you below thinking. It can be very comfortable for a while. At least you're not being tortured by your mind for a while. And so you puff away. Ah, so good, feels so good. What are your problems? I don't remember what my problems are. It's all so funny. Sometimes falling below could be mistaken for a state of enlightenment. But then, this is not the way we are going. We're not regressing, although there is a desire in every human being to become free of the self, an unconscious desire in every human being to become free of the self, what the Buddha calls the self, the egoic entity, the problem-making, heavy personality, that heaviness. I want to be free of that. There's so much suffering that goes with it. Want to be free. And so the drug taking these days is enormous in youngsters, a terrible epidemic of drug taking. And because the truth is not being taught, vital knowledge is, we live in a society, in a civilization, the entire global civilization almost, totally ignorant of what really matters. We have knowledge, a lot of knowledge, but absolutely no knowing, totally ignorant of what matters, and has lost touch with the source. God, if you like. If you don't, as always, people misunderstand what that is. So, presence within and without. Life does not cease from challenging you. And that doesn't change even if you awaken spiritually. You will get other challenges, different kinds of challenges. The only difference is, as you awaken spiritually, the way in which you respond to the challenges changes. And that is all important. How you confront the challenges of life, how you react to or respond to the challenges of life determines how you experience your life. How you experience your life ultimately is not determined by what happens to you, because most people think that that's the case, but how you experience your life, or what you call your life, is ultimately not determined by what happens to you. It is determined by how you respond to what happens to you. And how you respond to what happens to you determines what happens in the so-called future. How you respond now. Some people, whenever they are challenged by life, they behave as if there was something very wrong with their life, that things are not supposed to go wrong or be challenging. This is not supposed to happen. And this works on both a small scale and large scale. And you might have met people, and perhaps you were one of those people in the past, people who are continuously complaining about things. They're continuously not in alignment, continuously out of alignment with whatever is going on around them, situations and people and places and events. Either something is there that shouldn't be there, something is happening right now that should not be happening, or something is not happening that should be happening, or I should be somewhere else, but I'm here, and that's a huge problem. I'm trying very hard to get there, but I'm here. Now, this sounds a little weird when I say it like this, but the sad fact is that many people live like that for most of their life. They are not aligned with what they are doing right now. Yes, they are doing it, but they are not fully in the doing because they'd rather be somewhere else. They would rather be already at the end of this particular activity. And when you're very much in that mindset, that means your life is stressful continuously. Stressful means there's a mental projection of where you need to be or should be, but you're here. So you're engaged in this activity, but you have certain thoughts that tell you either you already want to be at the end of what you're doing, or although you are doing this, you really should also be doing, or would be doing that, and that, and that, but you're doing this. A dreadful way to live. Normal, by the way, it's called normal. And you see it when you watch the movies, everybody's like that in the movies, so it must be normal. They're all like, and people love to see the dysfunctional way in which people live reflected on TV and in the movies. They see reflected their own dysfunction, and that serves as a confirmation that, okay, I'm actually okay because everybody's unhappy. Everybody is living in this way, in this a state of almost continuous dissatisfaction, except for brief moments, sometimes to do with having a good meal or sex. Could do it for a while. This doesn't last very long. Or you get what you wanted. You get what you wanted. The thing that you said, oh, that's what will make me happy. And then you get it. And for a moment you feel, and you feel this happiness arising. And why do you think you feel this happiness? Because you got what you wanted. But if you look more deeply, you will realize that you do not really feel happy because you got what you wanted. You feel happy because for a very short time period, the mind structure that was always unhappy with the isness of things, there's something is missing here, I need that, I need to get rid of that, that mind structure subsides, and for a moment you don't want anything except what is here now. And that suddenly you feel more alive, you feel, and now then perhaps you begin to understand why the Buddha talked about the greatest obstacle to spiritual awakening being continuous, well, he called it, and in the translations, it's called desire. But a better translation of what the Buddha was talking about is a more vital term, is wanting. The continuous wanting this, wanting that, wanting the neediness, the wanting, and that is the mind structure that operates in humans that prevents them from experiencing the deeper dimension of reality, which we could call the timeless dimension of consciousness. Remember, we talked about time a few minutes ago. We talked about time, and yes, a few minutes ago, and we talked about the express train that you can't get off. We talked about the fire that is consuming you, that is time. That is true. But the good news is that there is in every human a deeper dimension of consciousness. In many humans, it's only a potential, a latent potential, like a seed. In others, the seed has already begun to sprout. There is the possibility in humans of accessing and living from a deeper dimension of consciousness. And accessing that deeper dimension of consciousness is what we could call spiritual awakening, where you realize that in addition to being a person, a personality, or a person who lives in this world of time, of past and future, in addition to being this person, there is more to you. There are other dimensions to who you are, or more specifically, there is a deeper dimension to who you are than the merely historical person. And that's why we are here tonight, because I want this not just to be a conceptual talk, although of course we're using words, but the aim is for you to experience at first hand, even if it's only a glimpse, or to deepen. For many of you, it'll be just a deepening because you already are sensing what it is that I'm talking about. You say, I think I know what he's talking about. You're already sensing within yourself what it is that I'm talking about when I speak of a deeper dimension of who you are, a deeper sense of identity of who you are. One could say that everything that you perceive is a surface phenomenon. It's the surface of reality. And underneath your perceptions, there is a vastness, like the ocean. And whatever you're seeing is the surface of the ocean. So underneath that, there's a vastness of energy formations, ultimately the one consciousness expressing itself in these all very short-lived forms. And under the deeper you go, the stiller it becomes. This is probably what Plato talked about, the ancient Greek philosopher, that there are ideas in the unseen realm. There's the world of what is translated as ideas, but it's not a good translation. He said before things exist as a physical thing and come into existence, they already exist on an unseen level in the world of consciousness. And then the consciousness manifests as something or someone. The universe manifests briefly as you. And as you become conscious, in you, it is the universe that is becoming conscious. You're not, I mean, you think you are a person, and of course, in conventional terms, you are a person. But ultimately, you're not a person, it's absurd. What does that even mean? I mean, the word means a mask. Person comes from Latin, persona means mask. I mean, you're not a mask. You're not a person. What are you? Who are you? You're not separate from the universe. So you are an expression of the universe. You haven't fallen into this universe from somewhere. You've come out of this universe. And then you go back into it, and then you come out again as something else. You die, you're born, Oh, what's this all about? And then you, and then you, oh, that wasn't a very nice life. Oh, this one is better, but it doesn't last. So the one consciousness appearing as the multiplicity of beings. So you are the awareness of the universe. You are the consciousness of the universe. How could you not be? And you can realize that even if you are living in a prison cell, and there may be someone at some point who listens to what I'm saying right now, in a prison cell, you can realize this, and it may not be pleasant, but even if you're in a prison cell, you can at least, more fundamentally, step out or become liberated from the prison of your mind. And that is a more fundamental prison than the prison cell that you are in. Even in a prison cell, and I've had correspondence from people in prison who said they feel free now. You can become free of being prisoner of your mind, and that's a far worse prison cell than the physical prison cell. And other people perceive that they are imprisoned in a body that is no longer functioning well. As your body if your body is not functioning properly anymore, then increasingly you may feel that you are trapped in your body. And that is, for some humans, that becomes an opportunity for going deeper and realizing that, in essence, they are the consciousness that animates the body, but they are not the body. And on the level of consciousness, there's no handicap, there's no dysfunction. So we touched upon this last night, when a great opportunity arises when the world of form and the personal sense of self that identifies with the world of form becomes very dissatisfying. That's a great opportunity. In other words, taken completely out of your comfort zone. And then you are more motivated to awaken and to realize who you are in your essence. But the good thing is, you don't have to wait for that anymore, because you have consciously chosen, well, with a little bit of help from suffering, for most of you, your personal, so-called personal suffering has been the motivating factor that brought you here. Or perhaps you've suffered in another life and have come back and have said, oh, I did enough in my last lifetime, I'm ready to awaken already now. That's fine. And then most of you have reached the point of the end of suffering. And I'm speaking of the psychological suffering that is mind produced. There is no other suffering. There is physical pain that exists, But the term suffering, in the way we use it, implies that there is a suffering entity, and it implies that there is mind, a mind-made sense of self that is not surrendered to life. And as the way I put it, humans need suffering to awaken, and suffering means they're confronted with the challenges of life. They're confronted with the problems of life. All the things that they dislike most in their lives are the most important thing in their lives. It's totally reversed. All the things that you think these things are making my life miserable, those are the very things that are most helpful for your spiritual awakening. And then that includes your ex-wife or ex-husband and people like that, because often life comes to you as people who are making your life miserable. Dogs, less so. You might get bitten by a dog, but it's unlikely that you have lived with a dog that made your life miserable, but it's very likely that you've lived with a human who made your life miserable, and probably with several. And then there are other things that were challenging: accidents, illnesses, loss of security, so-called. There's no security, it's just work. Loss of social function, perfect job, defeats, things that you tried and you were not successful, you did not succeed. And spiritually, failure is much more helpful than success, by the way. Or you succeeded greatly, and after a while it all collapsed. Or the success remained, but it became totally empty and meaningless. You achieved fame and wealth, and suddenly you were more unhappy than before. So spiritually, the most helpful things are those things that the ego judges as the most awful things in my life. But the amazing thing is for you to discover that you don't need to think all the time, that there is a realm, a dimension of consciousness in you that does not consist of thought. That's an amazing discovery. And as perhaps, I would say, the most essential discovery for anybody to make, and I believe it's never been mentioned on the news. The world's most amazing discovery, never been mentioned. So you have two identities, we could say. You have your form-based identity, which is the identity of your physical body, and your psychological identity that is largely determined by your past. The past, so-called past, leaves accumulations in the mind, and of course that's what the past is, because apart from the accumulations in your mind there is no past. There's only the eternal present. So apart from the identity that is past-based of who you are, which is a mixed bag for most people. There's good stuff in it and bad stuff in it. For some people, it's pretty bad. That's the sense. So that's where people get their sense of self from, who I am. And that's what they like to think about. Most people's mind activity is, to a large extent, occupied by thinking about themselves and trying to solve the problem of me, trying to solve me and my problems. The strange thing is, you solve one and another one pops up behind you, problem after another. And so you have to think even harder about yourself, especially in the middle of the night. And so your sense of identity becomes a problematic one, very common phenomenon for most people. To the extent even that they regard themselves as a problem to be solved. I am a problem that requires a solution. And that's a heavy identity. And this is what happens easily when you're not aware of your deeper, more essential identity that has nothing to do with your personal history or your past or your future, but realizing the essence of who you are is formless, a formless sense of presence, like this. Sometimes I call it space consciousness. Sounds a little bit like science fiction, but it's not. It's awareness of that inner space, or spaciousness. And usually meditation is designed to help you realize that. No matter what technique you use, the technique is not the meditation. The meditation is the realization of your essence. Now, many people who meditate don't really get anywhere much with their meditation. First of all, because they think they need to get somewhere. That's why they don't get anywhere. And they think meditation is a doing rather than realizing it's the relinquishment of doing, even internally. But this does not mean sleep. In ordinary life, the relinquishment of doing is usually associated with the onset of sleep. Everybody stops doing when they finally drop off to sleep. Well, they're still dreaming, so they're still doing, but then they go periodically into dreamless sleep, and that's the end of all doing. But here, that you consciously realize the being state as your essential self. And another reason why for many people meditation works a little bit, but a big barrier is also the belief that there is something to achieve when you meditate. But true meditation is not an achievement, but a discovery. Now, what's the difference between an achievement and a discovery? An achievement is something that you do and you make it happen and you create it. Discovery means there's something that's already there. You don't create it, you don't contribute to that. You discover a new continent, you discover a new planet. You don't achieve a new planet. It's already there, but you didn't know it was there. So this dimension of consciousness is already there in everyone. The only thing is, they are so hypnotized by the paintings on the canvas, which are your sense perceptions, your thoughts, your emotions, that they are never aware of the canvas itself as the essence of the painting. That's all. So it's just, one could say, a redirecting of your attention. Normally, your attention is in sense perceptions and thoughts. In the Bhagavad Gita scripture, it has this image of wild horses that are dragging along the carriage, which are the sense perceptions that pull your attention continuously outward, like wild horses, and you can't stop them. Now, that was a long, long time ago. Now, that hasn't changed, but something has changed in the meantime since that was written. The mind, the thinking function, has become magnified and amplified since then. So the real wild horse is much wilder than the senses which draw your attention. Something that draws your attention much more powerfully is your thoughts. Because humans, contemporary humans, are burdened with incessant bombardment of thinking. Dreadful state.